Thanks for joining us. Coming up on this video, Samantha Craven, Programs Manager of the Reef-World Foundation, talks to us today about the Green Fins Initiative.
Hello. Okay, so Samantha Craven, you're from the Reef-World Foundation and you're our episode today. So thank you for joining us. You're out in the Philippines. You are a marine biologist and you've been diving the reefs of Southeast Asia for over 19 years. In 2012, you turned your hobby into a career with the Reef-World Foundation, the international coordinators of the UN Environment Programme Initiative Greenfins. As Programme Manager, you ensure the team and the programmes they take on are trained towards conservation impact and the charity's targets. You train and support governments, NGOs across 11 countries to drive sustainability within marine tourism industries. So you believe in the potential of the diving industry to truly role model sustainability and champion coral reef conservation globally. So probably some of our listeners would not have heard of Reef-World. Do you want to just say how you kind of got involved in it and heard about Reef-World?
I guess most people won't have heard of Reef-World. Many more people will have heard of greenfins, and sort of how they're related can be a little bit hard to untangle. So I'm sure we'll get into that as the podcast goes on. But Reef-World is a UK charity, and it was incorporated as a charitable trust in 1999. And its roots are really in Thailand, where our founder, Anne Miller, now Paranjoti, was finding ways to sort of build up the capacity of the community to really protect what are their own coastal resources. So she was actually teaching sort of local people how to speak English in order to be snorkel guides, and through that also integrating some messages about protecting the environment and sort of, what to do, what not to do when it comes to interacting on the reef, because not everybody knows what it is. And in particularly in Southeast Asia, where we have so much, it's very much a food source, and it's not necessarily something that gives you much more than that. People wouldn't know, especially back then. So that's really where our roots come from, and we try and stay as true to that as possible now that, how many years later, and it's grown considerably. Mm-hmm. And in about 2008, I believe, the UN Environment Programme initiated greenfins in the Philippines and in Thailand. And the government department they were working with in Thailand is called the Phuket Marine Biological Centre. Mm-hmm. And Anne was already working with them on various other projects. And so to have someone who could speak to the foreign dive industry as well as the local dive industry was a real asset there when we first started rolling greenfins out. So that's sort of how Reef-World first started to get involved with greenfins. And then a couple of years later, going to UNEP's Southeast Asia headquarters in Bangkok and saying, countries need to be doing this. We can help bring it to those countries. We can help standardize this approach in a way so that people can recognize it between all these different countries. And then the rest, as they say, is history. That's us becoming the global technical lead for greenfins, which means that we're working with governments around the world to use this approach to manage their marine tourism industry, to learn new skills, how to interact with a different stakeholder, because government can be very focused and sometimes a little bit removed from the day-to-day of what's going on. And the diving industry is the eyes on the reef, they're there every day. So can we combine forces and do a better job at protecting the reefs?
So how many countries does the Reef-World Foundation cover now?
So we work with 11 countries to implement greenfins. Mm-hmm. It started off, of course, just with Thailand and the Philippines, and then we sort of brought in Indonesia and Malaysia, focusing very much on the Coral Triangle countries at the beginning because, of course, that has the most reef, it has the most biodiversity, and also some of the busiest diving industries. So it was a natural starting point. But very soon after, spreading into the Indian Ocean with the Maldives, Palau in the Pacific, Egypt in the Red Sea, that was last year, I believe, and then Antigua and Barbuda and the Dominican Republic over in the Caribbean.
So are you work with the liverboats?
So the main focus so far has been the actual dive centres themselves.
Yeah.
what are your top tips for people that are thinking about traveling, going to a dive centre? So we've obviously said about being conscious of greenfin members, but have you got any other top tips that people should consider in view of, you know, the whole sustainability side of things, if they were going somewhere like the Philippines or, you know, onto a reef environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, the first one would be look for Greenfin's members. I think we talked about tipping guides, snorkel or dive guides that are helping you protect the environment and having those conversations with you. For divers in particular, do a weight test if you haven't been diving for a while. I mean, that can be one of the biggest challenges that especially for me, I've found going from dive center to different countries. Is it pounds? Is it kilos? How can I remember this? I'm renting this wetsuit and it's dry and it's different, and, you know, or I got a new piece of kit, or my fins are heavier now. I don't know, like, things change. So really nice to ask to do a weight test and to ask your guide to look out for you. I mean, it's a customer service industry, so, you know, explain what service that you do want. I'd also really recommend people working on their buoyancy. So, I mean, that's hand in hand with the weights, but doing anything you can. Peak performance buoyancy and, you know, the equivalents in other agencies are really fun courses to do. People can do it with hoops and all sorts of stuff. It can be really fun. And I guess touching back to, you're not just one diver, you're representing humanity when you go underwater, so be aware of that. There's many things I would love to touch underwater. And actually, you know what? In all honesty, I used to. I was a terrible amateur photographer. I didn't know, and I didn't think. Like, there was I was in my bubble of this is cool, and I want to do this, and I want to see this, and I want this photo. And I'd started moving away from that even before I found greenfins. But of course, once I did find greenfins, even more so. But it took someone calling me on it to sort of remove that wool over my eyes, as it were. So find ways to do that yourself. It took me a long time to realize I'm one of 100,000 divers that are going to visit this reef in a year. So if I'm doing something that's causing damage to the animals in the marine environment, and coral is an animal, what are we all doing? So trying to think of your place in that and taking a bit of responsibility. But if people go to greenfins.net, we've got tons of posters, icons, like visual things that are sort of showing people what behaviors and what activities should and shouldn't be sort of done when you go. Our sort of catchphrase for greenfins is we want to make sustainable diving the social norm. And that speaks to everything that you were saying, is you've got to have these messages coming in from different areas. And it's not like, oh, we know what to do, that's better. It's just the reality of interacting with a natural environment that is fragile. I mean, it's very resilient, but it needs to be dealing with less in the face of climate change. And we can do that with diving. And I think you're right. The more people know what to expect, the easier it is to manage them. And it is so effective. We always tell the guides, you know, in your briefings, just include that you might correct them or help them with their buoyancy if you see that a diver isn't, so that when, you know, you feel a tap on your shoulder or on your ankle and the guide's sort of lifting your fins up, you know what that's coming from. And the briefings especially is one of the biggest tools that a dive guide has.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share. You can also visit our podcast version, The Big Scuba Podcast. Details are below. You can now support both our channels at Patreon. Details are in the description box.